Welcome to the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Real inspiration for real innovators. If you're looking for innovation and leadership transformation, your journey starts now.
Welcome to the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. I'm your host, Natalie Born. Look, if you're enjoying these innovation episodes, don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss a future episode. By following us at the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast, you will stay at the forefront of trends and real world strategies that impact today's leaders. Well, I'm really excited to have with us today one of those transformative leaders. It's Louisa Loran. And Louisa has led growth at Google, also Maersk, and then Diageo. And so combining strategic foresight with human-centered approach, she has built a billion-dollar supply chain business at Google, redefined Maersk's global strategy. So we're going to talk all about that today. Today, she's an advisor of boards and also executives worldwide. So Lisa, we're really excited to have you on the podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Well, I'd love to start with a little bit of your background. Obviously, you have worked on transformation in many different organizations, and I'd love to just get a little bit of your backstory as we're diving in today.
Of course, no, happy to share. And you're absolutely right. I do have a very diverse background. I have built my career in at least three different industries. First chapter in consumer products at Moet Hennessy and Diageo. You may not know those names, but I'm sure people know the Smirnoff, the Tanqueray, the Guinness, and all these great products that Diageo has. And at that point in time, of course, I learned to understand brands and consumer trends and optimize portfolios around the world. It was a great learning ground to get under the skin of what's the difference between a consumer demand and what's the responsibility one carries for a legacy of a brand that has lived significantly longer than one is in that role.
Wow.
After 13 years at Diageo, it was time for me to move on, and I was moving back to Denmark, where I'm from, and chose to join Maersk, which is the world's largest logistics and shipping company. So most people know it from the containers that you see passing by on the highway, but we don't really think about how much of everything we have around us that's actually been moved at sea. So landing in that industry after a consumer products lifestyle world was, of course, completely different. But I think that's what drives me, the ability to actually see things from completely different side, coming in with very complementary skills to what everyone else had there. It was interesting to see how I also needed to relearn quite a lot of things and see how I could speak a language that was meaningful for them. But at the same time, also really see how injecting my skills could transform what they did. And I did a similar leap 6 years later when I moved from Maersk into Google. And I think all of us have written digital strategies, or at least those that have had that within their remit. But when you then land in an environment that's both digital, you see that you were not wrong before, but the extent to which the world is seen differently is phenomenal. So I have moved myself across these different industries, and across them also worked with customers that transfers all of them. And this has given me this, let's say, skill to be curious about the future, always look at what's happening next, how could a business model evolve. Also, not just keep it as, let's say, a pie in the sky or a dream, but quite structurally go after it. What would it take? What do we tangibly need to do to achieve this dream? And then last but absolutely not least, what drives me and what motivates me is once you've done that plan, once you've seen that PowerPoint, whatever it may be, how do you actually find the courage within the leaders to go after it? And I think this is really the common thread that doesn't matter which industry, doesn't matter which customer, which partner I've worked with. I've seen that people are smart and they're curious and all these things, but there are other things that are really holding them back. And it is that courage within that I really have seen the value of bringing out so people can achieve much more.
Well, we'll get to courage in a second, but I have a question for you before that, which is, my executive coach and I talk a lot about spanning leadership, the ability to span what you do across different industries, even across different types of roles. I would love to know, before we kind of move on from your background, what is something that you found was native to you that you needed and you were able to bring into each one of those roles? Like, what was the through line for you of going from, these different types of industries and different types of roles? What kept you kind of grounded as a leader and knowing that, hey, I'm moving in the right direction? And whether it was your gut or whatever, like what was that thing that harnessed you into those different roles?
I think what really drove me continuously throughout this is curiosity, like deep curiosity and intellectual curiosity. Why is it the way it is? Why are people motivated to this? What could be different here? What could be the question? So that's been, let's say, the driver of that exploration and continuously trying to see whether it was relevant elsewhere. I think that the grounding part that you talk about came later for me because I was definitely like many others who were constantly seeing the opportunity and running after it. But it took a while and learnings in my career to realize actually I had much more of that control of achieving the sense of accomplishment myself instead of seeking it externally. Just a little anecdote on I'd say my journey towards here. For instance, I said I started at Moet Hennessy, which is a large part of the French conglomerate LVMH, one of the world's largest luxury companies. And I actually started because when I was in seventh grade, I had to write an essay. And it was about what do you want to be when you grow up? And I wrote that I wanted to market and sell highly branded lifestyle products for LVMH. And I remember my teacher was like, well, people were saying they wanted to be a fireman or a ballerina. And this is what I was writing. I can't actually remember what I sensed at that point in time, but it was clearly enough to choose to write about it. So when I was 23, this role appeared in the market as business manager Lord Hennessy. And I thought, I have to apply. I was severely underqualified. I had there were 10 criteria, I had one of them. So I just said to myself, look, you have to apply. You will get a decline. It's absolutely okay, but just for the sake of the learning experience. So I sat down and wrote an application, and of course I got a decline. And I thought that's absolutely fair. I would have done the same thing myself. But 5 months later, they called me back and asked whether I was still interested.
Wow.
And I was like, this is very strange. Of course, I went to university and business school, and I had on paper the right skills, but I didn't have any experience to take on this big responsibility for the market. But I came into the interview being very honest, being very curious, being willing to learn, and being willing to take the responsibility and learn with it. And they hired me, and that was my way into that industry and into Diageo following that. So I think very early on, I have had this sense of being curious, being open, not being afraid to try things, accepting the consequences, but it has more than actually opened a door for me.
Wow. That's so cool. And I think, the part we haven't talked about yet is courage. I mean, you have to have courage to step out there and ask for something that you're not necessarily capable yet of doing. But who really decides capability, right? I mean, sometimes you actually have to get your feet wet. You have to understand what the role entails, and then you rise to the occasion. And so that for sure takes courage. And I'd love to know more about how courage has shaped this journey for you.
Absolutely. And I didn't know that I was going to succeed in this role, but I did, and I exceeded the expectation. So I think it's also about creating the environment where people can step up to it. And I said, I think this is where I have also really gone on a journey myself. There have been times where, for instance, at Maersk, where we were writing a transformational strategy of this very operational company, there was an executive decision to sell off a large part of the business. And the message was clearly to say, you need to grow what is left to be at least the same size and a higher margin of what we had before. My knowledge and my customer insights have given me clues as to where could pockets of value be, but that was not the same thing as all these people who had been hired for decades based on their IQ were willing to change their understanding of what was right for this company. And I think that's where I really experienced very much firsthand that it's not about having the right answer. A lot of people have the right answers across many organizations. It's about understanding how do you bring it into the right context and how do you actually address those barriers that are holding people back to go after it. And that comes back to the courage point, because the barriers are quite rarely, let's say, external. They're normally past narratives that people have in their own leadership journeys or things that they believe to be true that confines their decision making going forward. So I started just being curious, just asking questions. Why are you doing this? Why are you not doing that? Why are you not considering this? And of course, behind closed door, because my intention is never to expose anyone, but to have people realize and reflect on what is holding them back. This was actually done in let's say, dialogue with some great bosses who also challenged me and said, Louisa, why are you on this crusade? Why do you need to push so hard for it? And I said, but the money's there, the value is there, and you told me to do it. So, yeah, but that's not the same thing as everyone's comfortable with seeing themselves in that environment. So being curious about what was holding them back also taught me what was holding me back and what was, let's say, making me not believe in the courage of the success, but just leaning into a challenge for the sake of proving I could do it.
Wow. There's so many principles here that you're pulling forward. That curiosity, we underestimate how powerful it is. And, we can ask a question in a way that sounds accusatory, or we can ask a question in the way that sounds curious. And what I love about this story is you looked for opportunities to get curious with your leaders, to push them, and in turn, push yourself. You were pushing your ability to communicate better, to figure out the right way to position and bring ideas into the room. And those are things that you just don't learn in business school, which is, how do I position an idea for success? How do I better ask questions so that leaders will understand the thinking, the logic, the path that my brain is on, and how do I help them arrive at similar conclusions? And so I love this conversation because those are the things that are more caught than taught. No one really teaches you how to bring an idea in the room in a way where you can get buy-in, agreement, and then move forward.
Yeah, and I think indeed I have chosen to challenge my brain by putting myself in very different contexts. And I've since been curious enough to learn why the brain works that way and how neurogenesis is exactly enabled by creating those new settings. But we can't assume that people change their setting in order to think new ways. So how do we actually create the mind space, either by, let's say, challenging the assumptions that they had before, or saying, what if you have this? What if you were this? What if you did this? What would you think? And inviting them to be more creative. I think it's also been interesting how in the different cultures that I have operated and with the different customers that I've worked with, how some believe that this is the only truth. And then you walk into another meeting straight after and they're like, this is the only truth. And you're like, you're not wrong, but you're very subjective in your view. And you are in environments where it is a reinforcing voice that confirms what you said. And probably if you're very senior, your people underneath you, even if they had other perceptions, would not challenge you on it. So it takes a lot to remain curious, remain open, not ask a question and spend the time preparing for the answer for the next one. But I think that is truly where we not only accelerate business in ourselves, but also where we prepare ourselves to operate successfully in environments as we are in today. I think the degree of change we have both geopolitically and technology wise, no one can say that they know what's going to happen. So it's more about building a muscle of constantly being okay with change and being interested in defining options that you can step into.
Wow. That was very powerfully said. I want to talk a little bit about, well, several things, but I want to talk about your time at Google. You said something interesting earlier that it's almost like you just had this extreme mind expanse, right? When you went to Google. I would love to know a little bit more about what that was like and why.
Yeah, I joined Google into a team of doing supply chain solutions, and it was just as COVID was starting. So there was probably never a better time to build supply chain solutions for the world. Joined because I believed in the principles of data and collective intelligence, which is a large part of what Google's platforms are built upon. And I thought if anyone can truly remove waste in the global supply chains, it would be someone who could actually surface some of that data, give transparency to it, and reduce a lot of the waste that does exist. So very much joined with a purpose. But when you come from traditional businesses that have a clear strategy, they have a hierarchy, they have all these things that we know from traditional businesses, and you land in an environment where everything is huge potential, exploratory, all this, you're like, but how do we optimize? How do we prioritize? How do we? but you don't. And that's by design. You actually enable several seeds to be planted and you see which one grows the fastest. So there was a lot of holding oneself back as a leader, not saying to all these teams, well, you need to do and you need to do, but understanding how value gets created in a true platform business. And you have to reteach yourself the value of sharing information, having a data access culture where people can actually spend time learning about each other in order to then deploy them into a context. What I will say, though, is I have only been in great companies. I have seen some very testing environments, I will say. But what is interesting is how does one combine these two ways of thinking? How does one have a sense of direction and conviction that this is a successful path for the business and at the same time enable and empower everyone to contribute? I think that is really what the world is experiencing now. We have right now a divide between, let's say, old and new, but the power comes in when you actually are able to say, empower this organization, but go forward. Because the principle of building platforms is exactly the reverse of what you have in a traditional world where it is, I have an asset and you should be grateful to join or to have access to my asset versus I'm grateful if you use my asset and build upon it.
Yeah. Wow. Big mindset shift.
And I think it really comes from decades of experience and sitting in so many rooms and seeing how simply giving a different perspective helps people to make greater sense of their own strategy. And creating a framework so it was more, let's say, teachable. What it really does is just bring these stories into a context. But when I look at the companies or the individuals who are hugely successful, I see these patterns of these 4 core areas. So visioning and envisioning ambitiously is truly not just looking at what's my task at this moment, but what could be. What do I have the ability to be in the future? What knowledge do I have? What capabilities do my team have? What's the difference if I live in the current operating model? What if I were an AI? What would I be tuning? What would I be offering? Who would be coming to my platform? So it's very much that space of not being locked in your own current environment and thinking about what could be. Expanding is then saying, okay, you have that beautiful dream. How do you actually make it possible? How do you make yourself achieve further than what you could before? And that's quite often simply tapping into the collective intelligence that's around you. So how do you empower your teams to contribute? But also, how are you very conscious about which capabilities are not differentiating? Which ones can you partner and therefore move faster? And which ones do you need to protect? I think what's also interesting in the current, let's say, AI revolution is there was that time of, oh my God, AI is just a hype. Then there was everyone has to have AI. It was in every board conversation. Then there was the ROI is not materializing. We're pulling back. And now it's into, okay, it works for certain things. So we're going to do that, all of us. The reality is those journeys are probably a natural part of this, but it also means that people are reacting to the hype at the moment instead of stepping back and saying, what is it that is core to us and that we will protect? We may even tune an AI that others can later subscribe to versus what are the areas that are not. I will say I've spent quite a lot of time with large CPG companies, for instance, who are very happy to say, I cut my cost and I outsourced all these things. And I go, that's lovely. But if your product is currently under a lot of price pressure, is your greatest asset actually not your customer service and understanding what the customer demands are? So if you have outsourced that and it happens to be to someone who your competitors also outsource it to,
Wow.
they know more about the needs in the market now than you do. And then they're like, calm down, go back, and find out what is your core proposition, what could it be in the future. So this area of thinking expansively builds really on the first chapter of seeing where you are in the future. Steering is quite interesting because I find it's very much 50-50. In some businesses, this is what they're great at. They can do it in their sleep. It's about prioritization. It's about communication. It's about staffing, all these things. For others, they are too emotionally involved and don't actually do this in a clear-cut way. But I think what I really encourage people to, and I tell stories about, is this element of staffing for the future, creating clarity, knowing how to work with your own teams. In every organization, there is a change maker. Do you know who they are? Do you partner them with the best business person? Do you have them swap KPIs? Do you give them sufficient air cover? This is not the person that's going to change your total culture, because everyone should lean into it. But they are the ones that are going to help paint that pictures that others can then step into. So it's some of these softer nuances that are so critical when you are trying to change a larger team. And last, embodying. So embodying, I think, is, as I said, the one that I also encountered the latest myself. But it is that sense of saying, who am I going to be in this future environment? We see so many business leaders who actually intellectually get where the world is going, who also see I have talent around me, who say, mathematically, I can see what I should be doing to steer. But I am not comfortable leading this in the future, and therefore holding their businesses back.
Well,
I think the realization of actually what is your legacy and what is your tenure here to do is what creates the greatest businesses and the greatest leaders. Those who are able to say, actually, I'm not just going to survive this chapter, but I'm going to create an environment where I thrive in it and I can be the change. And some of these cues are much softer than the others. But when you see a leader who is comfortable defining a future, unlearning and relearning, stepping into that, that's where you get true followership. Right?
yeah, that's really good. Yeah, this is a leveling up of the playing field for sure for leaders to think about, are they ready to specifically take the organization to the next level, or are they the lid that's holding the organization back because maybe they're growing at the same rate? Wow. Okay.
And I think what is interesting is when you talk to organizations, you talk to the top leaders and they see one world, and then you say to them, can I talk to your organization? They give you your -1s, and you're like, no. Can I go -2, -3? And you walk into a room and they're like, why are you here to audit us? What's going on? But quite often when they get to open up, you actually realize that there are all these people who want to make their bosses successful, but can't decode what is happening on top, because there's one corporate message and then they see an individual who's not comfortable in that space at the same time. So the lost potential from not owning some of these changes and not understanding that any business that is led by someone who's not willing to start the transformation within themselves is actually wasting quite a lot of resources.
Wow, that's powerful. Where can people find and follow you?
They can find more on louisaloran.com. And of course, what's interesting is as you start to bring a message out into the world this way, it is really encouraging to see how many people latch onto it and say, how can I bring it forward? What can we create? So it is an expanding platform. So keep up to date on louisaloran.com. But I also welcome the conversation of how are you seeing it deployed in your environment? How do we actually keep these rings spreading? Because all the lost potential out there is ours to grab.
Wow, that's so good. Well, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a joy to be with you.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Natalie. Thank you so much for bringing me on.
Absolutely. Well, to our listeners, thank you for joining the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Remember, don't just get out of the box, break the box and set it on fire. Let's go transform something.
Thank you for joining us for the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Be sure to subscribe to our show on iTunes. Follow us on Instagram or Facebook at Innovation Meets Leadership, and visit our site at innovationmeetsleadership.com for more innovation resources.
Hey, my new book is out, Set It on Fire, The Art of Innovation. Click on the link to learn more. And don't just get out of the box, break the box and set it on fire. Let's go transform something.